Professor Stephen Litch in Principles of Economics. Right now, I'm going to be presenting a basic two country, two good model of international trade. So, I'm going to start by talking about the production possibilities of two countries. Um, this production possibility frontier has shown up before, but to go over it again, countries face trade-offs in what they can produce, and a politician about 1900, a politician named William Jennings Bryan, talked about the trade-off between producing guns or producing butter. And it's an idea that has stuck, or like that phrase has stuck. It's been repeated by politicians throughout the years. And it has a special appeal. Like this trade off between guns or butter is really talking about should a country use its resources to build a strong military or to promote domestic policy. But very literally, the same resource is used to produce either explosives or fertilizer. In the old days, when William Jennings Bryan was talking, it was something called saltpeter, which was sodium nitrate or potassium nitrate. It's an important ingredient in gunpowder. It's also a fertilizer. Today, it's ammonium nitrate is an explosive as well as a fertilizer. So it's literally true that one resource can be used to produce either military weapons or promote agriculture. And a country has to decide how it's going to use its resources. Okay, so in this model, I am going to talk about this choice between guns or butter. It seems like a silly example, but I'm trying to explain that there is this history of using those as symbols of domestic policy or military. Okay, so the two countries I'll talk about, I'll call them the United States and Canada. They each have some resources, some of this saltpeter stuff that can be converted into guns or butter. And the two countries will be a little bit different in terms of how efficiently they produce either guns or butter. And in this example, the US will be a little bit more efficient at producing guns, whereas Canada is more efficient at producing butter. And that actually generates gains from trade. So if both countries want a combination of guns and butter, it doesn't make sense. Sorry, let me back up. If both countries want to consume a combination of guns and butter, it doesn't make sense for them both to produce that combination. Instead, the US might focus on producing guns for both countries, and Canada focuses on producing butter for both countries. And by specializing, the two countries can produce and consume more together than they would have if they had tried to produce and consume everything on their own. Okay, so let me go here to the model. United States has 1,000 tons of saltpeter. Each ton of saltpeter can be used to produce either 2 guns or 1 butter. Okay, so that gives the United States a production possibility frontier that would include producing 2,000 guns and no butter, or the other extreme, producing 1,000 butter but no guns, or somewhere in between. Okay, anywhere in between. And the exact point they pick will depend on preferences. Of course, that's the point that William Jennings Bryan was trying to make. Where does the country want to be along this production possibility frontier? Okay, so for the sake of this model, let's suppose the United States decided that it wanted to spend half its resources to produce guns. Okay, so 500 tons of saltpeter turns into 1,000 guns, and the other 500 tons of saltpeter are used as fertilizer to produce 500 butters. So the U.S. produces and 1,000 guns, 500 butter, and if it's working on its own, that's also what it consumes. Okay, now go north of the border to Canada. Canada will be a little bit different from the US. And again, this is going to be the key thing that drives the gains from trade. Um, in Canada, a ton of saltpeter can be used to produce either one gun or two butters. Okay. So, why? I mean, perhaps Canada is simply more productive agriculturally and fertilizers more efficient. Perhaps Americans have developed better technology for producing weapons. You know, so I can't tell you exactly why, but let me say it's plausible that almost any two countries we pick will have reasons why they are different in terms of production. Okay. It would be a remarkable coincidence if both the United States and Canada had equal were producing exactly the same output using their resources, if they had exactly the same technologies. Okay, so for whatever reason, Canada has different abilities to produce guns and butter, and let's suppose that Canadians decide also that they're going to divide their resources evenly between producing guns and butter. So 500 tons of saltpeter are used to produce guns, giving Canada 500 guns, and the other 500 tons are used to produce butter, giving Canada 1,000 butter. All right. So next, I want to imagine what would happen if the United States and Canada tried working together. And the first thing is I'll draw this or show this production possibility frontier. At one extreme, if both countries were to use all their resources to produce guns, Canada would produce 1,000 guns and the United States would produce 2,000 guns for a total of 3,000 guns. So that's actually one of the extreme points on the production possibility frontier. The other extreme, the two countries together could produce 3,000 butter. If Canada produces 2,000 and the US produces 1,000. Okay, so, but unlike with a single country, whereas with a single country, the production possibility frontier was a straight line, when the two countries are working together, they will have kind of a kinky shape to their production possibility frontier. This point right here, this kink point, would represent the United States using all of its resources to produce guns, so that's 2,000 guns, and Canada uses all its resources to produce butter, so that's 2,000 butter. Okay? That is feasible. That's something that the two countries could produce if they work together. Okay, and so the complete production possibility frontier will connect these 3 points: 3,000 guns and no butter, 2,000 guns, 2,000 butter, and the third point, 3,000 butter and no guns. Okay, now the countries can select any point that they want along this production possibility frontier. I apologize. Here's the correct slide. So, perhaps what they decide is that they will produce this point, 1,800 guns, 2,100 butter. So that means that Canada is using all of its saltpeter to produce butter. So there are 2,000 Canadian butters. And then the United States uses 100 saltpeter to produce 100 butter. And the remaining 900 saltpeter are used to produce 1,800 guns. So again, Canada produces only butter, and the United States produces a mixture of butter and guns. And that puts the countries at this point 1,800 guns, 2100 butter. Okay, now at that point, they can trade. The U.S. had been producing 100 butter and 1,800 guns. It can give 700 guns to Canada in exchange for 600 butter. Okay, and so then the U.S. ends up with 1,100 guns plus 700 butter. And then Canada had been producing, what was it, 2,000 butter and no guns. After trading with U.S., they receive 700 American guns, and they give up 600 of their butter. Okay, so after trade, Canada can consume 700 guns, 1,400 butter. What I'm going to note here is that both countries are better after trade than they would have been on their own. The U.S. on its own could consume 1,000 guns and 500 butter. Okay, after trading with Canada, it can consume 1,100 guns, so more guns, and more butter, 700 butter instead of 500 butter. So U.S. is hands down better. It gets to consume more guns and more butter. And the same is true for Canada. Canada on its own could consume 500 guns and 1,000 butter, but after working with the United States and trading with the United States, it can consume 700 guns and 1,400 butter. So it has more of both goods. Okay, so moral of the story is really that by working together and specializing in production, people in both countries can consume more of both goods. So this is altogether good for everyone, or good for consumers in both countries. All right, so that's this basic model, and I want to talk about a couple more points, a couple more important points. First is what determines who produces which good. Okay, if one country specializes in producing guns, which country should it be? If one country specializes in producing butter, which country will it be? The answer is the country that has the lower cost of producing that good. And the way to think of cost is what the country gives up in order to acquire one more of that good. So the cost of butter in the United States is what the United States has to give up in order to get one more butter. And for the U.S., another butter means giving up 2 guns. Okay, so the price of a butter in the United States is 2 guns. In Canada, the price of a butter is half a gun. Okay, Canadians have to give up half of a gun in order to get butter. So again, the way to think of a cost is what the country has to give up in order to consume that good. And when it comes to specialization and trade, the country that has the lower cost of producing guns should produce guns. A country that has lower cost of producing butter should produce butter. We use the term comparative advantage to mean the country that has the lower cost in producing that good. So in this case, Canada has the comparative advantage in producing butter. And the United States has the comparative advantage in producing guns. This phrase comparative advantage means the lower cost of producing that good. Just as a note, comparative advantages will always be reversed. So if the United States has the comparative advantage at producing one good, Canada will have the comparative advantage at producing the other good. All right, I'm going to add one other note to this discussion of trade. The model here is really about international trade, but people on their in their daily lives do more or less the same thing that countries do. My family needs to consume a variety of goods and services. We need food, we need housing, we need clothing, we need education. But we don't try to produce all of those things on our own. To do that would be inefficient. So I don't try to grow my own food, build my own house, make my own clothes, and educate my own children. Again, that would be inefficient. Instead, people in my community have decided that we will specialize in doing whatever we do well. So in my case, I am relatively more productive at providing education than I am at doing other activities. I have the comparative advantage at educating people. So I specialize in doing that. I educate people, and then I trade those services for food and housing and clothing. And so instead of trying to produce everything that my household needs to consume on my own, I specialize in doing what I have the comparative advantage at. I let someone else specialize in producing food, another person specialize in building houses, a third person specialize in producing clothes, and then we trade our goods and services. That's what people do in our daily lives all the time. It's exactly the type of thing that and in our daily lives we can accomplish so much more because we don't try to do everything on our own. As a general rule, economists think that international trade should work the same way. That countries will be better if they try to focus on producing whatever goods they have a comparative advantage at producing, instead of trying to have all industries. Okay? So again, instead of the United States trying to have an agricultural industry and a manufacturing industry and a mining industry and a financial industry and a tech industry and every single industry, the U.S. should focus on doing what it does best and allow other countries to expand in the areas that they do well, and then we swap these goods and services. Okay, so that's a quick discussion of international trade. And then also, I wanted to tie that to kind of our daily economic lives, are analogous to the ways that countries trade. Okay, let me